Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. Today we're going to talk about a couple of medicinal herbs that are considered to be shrubs. First entry is going to be very short. It's spike moss. Now there's only one variety of spike moss that I have found that has documented use in herbal medicine. And that's a Selaginella. I'm going to assume this is pronounced tamariskina, probably. Selaginella tamariskina. But there are 4 spike mosses native to my region. These are all the Selaginella family. That's Selaginella. We have spiny spike moss and meadow spike moss and rock spike moss and 2 that have been naturalized, treelet spike moss and Krause's spike moss. So, we got a lot of spike moss, but I've only found documented use on the tamariskina. That's a hard one for me to say. Scina. Tamariskina. Anyway, more than likely, there just hasn't been a lot of research done into the other varieties of spike moss. So we're going to have to start probably doing a little cautious experimentation with the spike moss family, the Selaginella family, see what we can come up with. Botany in a Day says that medicinally the plant can be simmered in milk and used externally or internally for spider or snake bites. Now that's very interesting. So if we can use these externally, obviously we could experiment with the different spike mosses and see how they react. Now, unfortunately, if it's used for spider and snake bites, we don't necessarily want to be bitten by spiders and snakes. And if we are, we want to go with something we know is very effective. So this one may be a little hard to experiment with in that way. I think what I would start by doing is maybe try to use it with ant bites. You know, the ants have a venom. We could try that. And Botany in a Day did not specify whether it was a necrotic, necrotizing venom. Maybe a bee venom, you know, something like that. Yellow jacket sting, hornets, or nettles. Nettles have a very similar venom to both ants and bees, so we could try that and see. We'll see how that goes. So the only other entry I have on Selaginella, and it is the tamariskina, is from Plants for Future, and it says the whole plant is astringent and hemostatic. A decoction of it is used in the treatment of traumatic bleeding, hemoptysis in pulmonary disease, gastrointestinal bleeding, metorrhagia, hematuria, persistence of postpartum lochial discharge, rectal prolapse, and leukorrhea. So, We know the Tamariskina is very astringent and stops bleeding. It has both astringent and almost styptic type properties. So we don't know about this use for snake and spider bites, but we could experiment with the other varieties of spike moss and see if it has the same astringency and ability to stop bleeding. Now, I would start with these, using them again externally, and then venture, if they seem to be interchangeable with the Tamariskina externally, then maybe consider using them internally for internal forms of bleeding or discharge. But you want to check the toxicity on each of these. You would want to go to your state's botanical website, go to an extension agency, wherever you can find someone that has a database of toxic plants, and make sure. But I don't know of any toxicity of any of these, but we would have to see. Now, we'll move on to one that's a little more widespread and has a lot more documented historical use, and it is spirea or meadowsweet. Several varieties of meadowsweet have been used in herbal medicine. There are 5 that are shrub form that are native to my region. I'm not going to get into all these, but they do mainly grow in the mountains and foothills and such. There's one specifically native to Virginia, that's Spirea virginiana. There's one specific to Japan, which has been naturalized, brought in and planted by people, and that's Spirea japonica, or Japanese meadowsweet. These are often used as ornamental plants, and but they're really quite useful. King's American Dispensatory of 1898 says this is a beautiful shrub, common in low grounds and moist meadows throughout the United States. Flowering from May to August, the herbaceous part is used, especially the leaves and bark. It has an odor somewhat resembling that of black tea. It is very astringent and has a bitter taste, which properties it imparts to boiling water and infusion. It appears to contain tannic and gallic acid, volatile oil, and a bitterative extract. The fruit is persistent, remaining through the winter and furnishing food for snowbirds. Under actions and medicinal uses, it says this is a common name at the time. It was called hardback. I don't know why we call it meadowsweet, but anyway, hardback has been found an excellent astringent in summer complaints of children. I've had trouble finding, in a lot of the old books, they talk about summer complaints. It seems to be sort of a diarrhea, usually accompanied by fever, that might have been more common with bad water in the summertime, when pathogens were more likely to be present in water. That's the best I can figure. Maybe some are sensitive to heat, but it does seem to be something more along the line with warm weather pathogens that would be in water when people were drinking out of streams, or the water wasn't always that good. So I said it's also good for diarrhea and other diseases requiring this class of remedies, in other words, an astringent, and is less offensive to the stomach than most agents of this kind. It is likewise proved efficient as a tonic in cases of debility, that would be digestive weakness, convalescence from diarrhea and dysentery, etc., and to improve digestive functions. Passive hemorrhages and menorrhagia have been treated with it, while as an injection, good results have been obtained from its use in gleat and leukorrhea. We would call that more of a douche, not an injection. That can be a little confusing for people. It is generally given in infusion, the dose being 1 or 2 fluid ounces. Very elegant extract, not inferior to Ketachu, may be made by carefully evaporating the infusion by percolation, and which may be given in a dose of 2 to 20 grains. A tincture well representing the virtues of spirea may be prepared from 8 ounces of the fresh leaves and bark to 1 pint of 76% alcohol. Okay, a few things we need to talk about there. Now, first of all, that's a standard tincture, but it is using 76% alcohol. When you go to your liquor store or wherever you buy your alcohol, most of what's on the shelf is 40% alcohol or 80 proof. To buy 76% alcohol, you may be able to find a stronger version of Everclear, and if you can, that's going to be your best and best option. Otherwise, you're going to have to go through a pharmaceutical distributor. That's the only way you're going to get 76% grain alcohol. We're not talking isopropyl or methyl or anything like that. We're talking ethyl alcohol, grain alcohol, the kind you can actually consume and it won't kill you. It's not antifreeze, that kind of thing. You may be able to get it from a pharmaceutical distributor or a chemist distributor, somebody that specifically works with pharmacists or chemists. Best way to do that usually is to talk with the chemistry department or a pharmacy department if you happen to have one at a local college or university, technical college, something like that, and see if they can give you the name of a distributor, tell them what you're doing. You know, they may be a little hesitant to talk with you if they think you're, cooking meth or something. I mean, these certain things they sell can be misused very easily. So, not necessarily meth, but more like fentanyl and such, But anyway, you may be able to get it that way if you have a friend who is a pharmacist and has a pharmacist license. You may be able to get it that way. Always good to make friends with a pharmacist. They tend to be really great people. I used to work in a drugstore. Just about every pharmacist I met was just a total oddball. Eccentric, brilliant, fun to hang out with. Really enjoyed getting to know all the pharmacists that I got to work with. And I got to work with several dozen, many on opposite polar ends of the political spectrum, really unique takes on life, good taste in music, and I don't know why, but pharmaceuticals tend to, not pharmaceuticals, but actually being a pharmacist tends to draw some of the kind of oddballs into the realm. So good to make friends with your pharmacist, but more than likely, now of course there's another option. You could of course make the alcohol yourself, which is completely illegal. To distill, you can make beer and wine legally, but if you want to distill it, which means just take the water out of it through the process of evaporation and condensation, the federal government says that's illegal, which is insane, stupid. In the history of America, look, most of the colonists who fought in the Revolution didn't give a crap about tea. They did not care that the British put a tax on tea. They weren't drinking tea. They were making and selling whiskey and brandy and rum, etc. And the British wanted to tax that. Our nation of America is only here because of moonshiners. That's why the majority and the best of the fighters in the American Revolution were Scots-Irish, moonshiners and fur trappers and frontiersmen, all of whom had a little still and made their own liquor, whether it was peach brandy or corn liquor, and sold it as part of their living. And they fought the British, and many of them gave their lives to give us this nation. And just as soon as they had, George Washington turned the army against them in what they called the Whiskey Rebellion because our federal government wanted to tax and regulate liquor. And one of the most, truly, if history was taught as it was, that would be an action of such utter betrayal that it would undermine the legacy of Washington and the political leaders of the time. Because the very men who had just given their lives or risked their lives and their families and their livelihoods to give us this nation were then turned on by our own government because of the very freedoms for which they fought. So anyway, I could talk about that for a while, but yes, if you are able to legally distill alcohol, you could make your own. So, probably your best choice, your best bet where you live in the United States is to get the highest proof of Everclear you can get. I don't do that. I make all my tinctures with just 40% alcohol and don't worry about it. But there is one other thing they mentioned that is called a percolation. Now, in the era, this was well into the 60s actually, even the 70s in most places, Before our modern pharmaceutical companies patented every drug, pharmacists made most things in-house. They were compounding pharmacies. They would take the raw ingredients and make them into pills and etc., capsules and syrups and all that. In really till about 1940 or so, a lot of those were in plant form. They were not refined chemicals. They were in plant form. And one of the most reliable ways of making a pharmaceutical grade tincture, essentially, is to make a percolation. Now, up until the 60s or so, you could buy from a pharmaceutical supplier what's called a percolating cone or a percolation cone. What this is basically a large glass funnel. It has sort of a cap at the bottom that can be loosened so it gives a very slow drip. You would take, and it's open at the other end. You know, it's just basically a big glass funnel, but it's more conical in shape. It's more like a big glass bottle with the end cut off, and you can actually make your own percolator by doing it that way. Just be very careful you don't cut yourself. I learned how to do this in herb school years ago. We would take these big glass bottles with a screw top lid. I'm not sure exactly, or cap, I mean, I'm not exactly sure what they were originally for. And use a glass cutter or, some cordage that was soaked in kerosene and wax, I think, basically, and wrap it around there. And if you light that, it will heat the glass or weaken it in one point, and you can kind of tap it and break it off smoothly. That fails more often than it works. But you take a glass cutter and you cut the base off of this bottle, and then it goes into a stand, which makes it stand upright with the cap down, and the now open end, the base of the jar that you cut off, bottle again, I meant to say, up. And it's perfectly upright, perfectly straight. So, it's not tilting in any way whatsoever. You got to take a level, you got to make sure it's right. Then, of course, you're going to want to take some fine emery cloth and smooth off the cut edges so you don't cut yourself while you're using it. That's very important because you can really get cut on those things. Then you take a specific weight of dry herb and pack it in there. Put the cap completely on so it doesn't drip, and put a specific amount of very high proof alcohol. This is where we're going to want to have the pharmaceutical grade stuff or like the very highest proof drinking alcohol you can get. In some places, I think you can even get like a 90 proof Everclear. I don't think I can get that in North Carolina, but in some places you can. So, pack your herbs in there, and then you pour in the alcohol, and it's a specific ratio. There's a specific volume of herbs to volume of liquor. And cover it and let it sit for usually overnight, 24 hours. I mean, it completely, totally saturates the herb. Some actually call it for much longer than that. I mean, the herbs might be sitting in there for weeks. It just depends on what you're using. Then you very gradually open the valve at the bottom. If you've got an actual pharmaceutical percolation cone, it has a little screw valve. What we had was a little bottle cap. And you would slowly open it until you were getting a certain number of drips per minute. That, as the alcohol percolates through the substrate or the the herbs you have in there, the dry herbs, after thoroughly soaking in and extracting their properties, that drip and the 1890s through 1920s, 1930s was one of the most accurate measures of dosing you could have. You knew exactly how strong your tincture essentially was, your percolation was, and the number of drops was how you would dose things. So we don't do that much anymore as herbalists. We just make tinctures, we use medicine droppers, but back when pharmacists were herbalists and they were making their own medicines in their pharmacies, that is how they, especially if you're using something really dangerous like digitalis, you needed to know exactly how strong a drop of that digitalis was. And percolations were among the best way to do that. I think I may have left out one step in the process. I have to go back and look at my notes sometimes. This is something I haven't messed with in 10 or 15 years, or 20. It's been quite a while. But if you are a practicing clinical herbalist, it may be something worth looking into. Now, these days we also have hydraulic presses that can be used for tincture extracts. Strictly Medicinal, Richo's company, he sells some of these hydraulic presses. Certainly more expensive, but probably more often used now than percolation, especially since it's so hard to buy those old cones. You will have to learn to make your own, and you're going to get cut in the process. So anyway, I just wanted to clear that up because it isn't, I don't think most people realize how technical herbal medicine can be, and certainly was in the past, when 95% of the medicines that doctors used and pharmacists prescribed were plant-based. It wasn't just make a tea. You were doing serious chemical extractions, often converting things into, essential oils, distillations, grains. What a pharmacist learns today is, quite a bit different now that all the drugs are patented and they come in pill form from the pharmaceutical company. 100 years ago, a pharmacist was the town's very best herbalist, and he was the one making all those preparations. So, like King's Medical Dispensatory and other old pharmaceutical publications or apothecist publications, I believe King's was specifically for the eclectic school, but old pharmaceutical textbooks from colleges, pre-1920 at least, that'd be a good date to shoot for, are incredibly valuable to collect if you are an herbalist, especially if you're a clinical herbalist. A little basic chemistry at a community college will go a long way in making you a better apothecist, essentially, learning to use the tools of a chemist. And, in England, they still call a pharmacist a chemist. So, anyway, this is an aside, but, if you really want to further your herbal journey, a little basic organic chemistry, learning to use the equipment, and getting some of those old texts will really make you heads and shoulders stand out in the field. I know right now one of the very best herbalists I am aware of which I am aware, is a young lady up in the Midwest who is a pharmacist. And I think she's maybe a pharmacist assistant. I'll have to connect with her again and find out. But she works in a compounding pharmacy. Like the legit thing. And that's her day job, and then she works as a professional herbalist on the side. And what she brings to the field is really impressive. Whenever I run into something that's like a really weird condition that I've never even heard of, I refer them over to her. And she also knows a network of like-minded herbalists. And, some of them have medical degrees, and some of them have, pharmacy degrees, and etc. Some are chemists, and that's not my style. I'm a folk herbalist, but these are probably the people that are going to advance herbalism into the next century. And if you have that, interest, if you enjoyed, organic chemistry in high school or any of the more botany. I'm thinking more of the natural sciences. Then maybe that's something you want to look into, or medical classes, anatomy. You may have what it takes to be a clinical professional herbalist, and I would highly recommend you look into this and pursue that field because we need more of that. That's you know, so much of herbal medicine right now is dominated by new age woohoo witchy types, and that's sort of the opposite of that. And throughout history, herbal medicine has mostly been practiced by professional doctors and apothecasts, many of whom were also monks and nuns. They were certainly not witchy new age, people. That's not including, like the folk medicine of a certain tribe somewhere, but we're talking like London in the 1400s or France in, I don't know, the 1600s, or, I mean, you flip those numbers around. Ireland from about 1200 on, ancient Rome, Germany. These were professional trained, medical trained through Catholic colleges, doctors, physicians, nurses, and apothecasts who were herbalists. And that's where the bulk of our herbal knowledge comes from. It doesn't come from some tribe out in, Borneo somewhere. No, they may have a few, fantastic remedies or a lot of fantastic remedies. And the more we look into what they learned on their own, it may cure modern diseases. It's not to diminish them at all. But the bulk of Western medicine and even modern medicine comes from the herbal tradition as practiced in Western Europe and Central Europe for about 2,000 years before the switch over to everything being chemicals and pharmaceuticals and allopathic medicine, whatever you want to call it. And some of the main figures in that switch were also great herbalists like Paracelsus, who was the father of toxicology, was also probably the best herbalist in the Germanic and Central European countries of the time. And that's only in the 1400s. It hasn't been that long ago. So, anyway, let's get back to what were we on? Spirea, Meadowsweet. Sorry, did King say anything else about that? Well, they get a lot of the chemical compositions of it, and they say, I think they thought it also had some, was it used with salicin? Meadowsweet actually has salicylic acid in it. It has some aspirin type qualities. It's a good one. It can be used like willow and such. Also has a little camphor-like body and terpene. They were talking about how the different varieties that could be used interchangeably, and it was combined with Virginia snakeroot in dropsy, retention of urine, and prostate enlargement. Relieves the urinogenital irritations, influences the prostate gland, checking prostaturia. Also useful in GLEEP, vaginitis, lucral discharges, etc. So they talk about some native ones, but mainly they were using the Spirea auruncis and filipendula, which are European varieties that have been brought to the United States, naturalized from medicine. Botany a Day says Meadowsweet is astringent and diuretic. It contains methyl silicate, similar to aspirin or willow, and is used especially for arthritis, rheumatism, and urinary tract infections. Meadowsweet is becoming a popular herb because the salicate content is much more reliable from plant to plant than either willow or poplar. That's interesting. I know where some Meadowsweet grows near my house. I need to probably get some going in the yard. Seems like there's some masterwort right beside that. Those two herbs actually complement each other very well in fevers and flus. Yeah, I need to get that. And come to think of it, there's a whole patch of geranium cranebill geranium. It's almost like the herbs for the flu are growing right there together. I need to grab those. And there's some Joe Pye weed down the hill from there. That's amazing how things work. But anyway, Plants for a Future says medicinal use of white meadowsweet, an infusion of the leaves is esteemed as a restorative tonic. And finally, the Peterson Field Guide to Eastern Central Medicinal Plants says of Spirea tomentosa, that's the one that grows near me, it's more of a native. It says American Indians use the leaf tea for diarrhea and dysentery, flower and leaf tea used for morning sickness. Leaves and flowers were once used to stop bleeding, also for leukorrhea. Other spireas were used similarly. So, I think the spireas are pretty much interchangeable, and can't think of any real cautions with them, except that it does have salicin, and so it's, with its aspirin-like qualities, can thin the blood. So if you were on prescription blood thinners, you might want to avoid that one. Generally speaking, much easier on the stomach than aspirin. Willow, meadowsweet, violets, all contain salicin. Poplar buds. There's one other I'm trying to remember. Maybe masterwort, actually. I'll have to double check that. But anyway, these are salicin-containing plants. Not sure about masterwort, like I said. But the rest are salicin-containing plants. Birch. Yeah, birch is good. Birch twigs that have aspirin-type properties, but generally don't upset the stomach or irritate the stomach like aspirin, but could be slightly blood thinning, the same. Definitely good to have on hand, like if you have cardiac issues and, all kinds of stuff like that. Also great as a wash. Anything that has salicin in it's good for eczema, good for skin irritations, itching. So y'all have a great week, and I will talk to you next time.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.